Rob Grimes with the IFBTA. And today I'm really very pleased to have as our conversation guest and meet our member, the newest in the series here, the president of Adentro, formerly known as ZenReach, Nathaniel Brugadier. So welcome.
Rob, really appreciate it. Happy to be here.
As you start to think about it, the footprint, the digital footprint, of course, is more than just in the store, as you know. And our industry, especially because of COVID, all of a sudden everybody had to do delivery, online ordering, the ones that didn't. And I don't know if Tommy's Tacos did that or not, but they do it today for sure, right? Now, before you joined Adentro, you were with delivery.com, I think, right? So you were in the delivery sort of business here. So I'm just sort of wondering, A, why you made the switch, and B, what learnings you take from one to the other, because you actually moved over pretty much the pandemic was waning. So it wasn't during the pandemic when you probably had the boom over here, but how do you see that digital world inside and outside and the connectivity through things like delivery and online e-commerce, working together? And does your solution help to bring those pieces together?
Yeah. No, so I think it's the timing is pretty funny. I think, running delivery.com for 5 years prior to Adentro, we were preaching very, very clearly that you have to fortify your third-party e-commerce strategy, right? Because the delivery.com and Uber Eats and DoorDashes of the world have so many eyeballs, right? And if you're not in front of those eyeballs, you're going to miss out on sales, right? And that became very, very obvious. And the pandemic was a huge tailwind for the marketplaces, right? Now, coming out of COVID, the narrative has changed, and people, including myself, are keen to going back inside and having a social experience, in real life. And the disconnect in the market, Rob, is 70 to 75% of advertising happens online because it's measurable, but 80 to 85% of commerce is happening in the brick and mortar. So Adentro's created somewhat of a connective tissue where digital actions can result in on-premise sales. But now the narrative is very clear. It's about first-party data, and it's about fortifying on-premise. And I think, Noah Glass, who's super intelligent, I have a ton of respect for, he's actually out there. Really, I was at the Food on Demand conference and he was the keynote. He's saying first-party data on-premise is the future. And so for a guy who IPO'd an amazing business on the backs of third-party Rails and Dispatch to go on stage and start saying that, he's not turning his, he's out there kind of preaching the gospel. Like we're aligned with that, right? Like we believe first party on premise is the biggest piece of the pie, and we're enabling brands to help power that engine.
So I sort of take a look, so a couple of things that you've said, I'm like burning in my brain here to think about how I would phrase those, if I were talking to some other people about this. So I think you bring a unique perspective in a way that most food service operators might not think about, the tie-in between, the off-premise, on-premise, the data, bringing it all together, which you have both the personal experience and now the company experience to bring that together. But I do think that also it works the other way around, that while you're right, traffic is being driven into the store, what we're also learning is that we now have new revenue centers and day parts. The Holy Grail was always to get somebody either higher check average or to come in another time, a quarter, a month, or whatever it is. Well, now you can accomplish that also by what you do outside in e-commerce, because it's okay to get restaurant food at your house. So I think you sort of have made a very good point of how you would tie those things together. So if we think about digital channels, there's obvious ones that you've already mentioned, and there's probably non-obvious ones. Now, I used to tell people, if you want to go figure out digital channels, go to certain areas and certain websites and see where they're advertising to get the lead on it. It won't go down that rabbit hole, but because you can see who's finding new ways to communicate and connect, and it's an early way to identify those channels. So how should, what are the digital channels that marketers should be focused on? And actually, are there some interesting ones that you're starting to see out there that you actually think maybe we should pay attention to?
Yeah, I mean, so when people think about social and obviously Meta, Facebook and Instagram, right, are ones that people really gravitate
They're
towards.
the obvious.
We're integrated with TikTok, Snapchat. I mean, the reality is because we can measure who was exposed just to the impression, even without clicking on or interacting with that ad, just exposed to the impression and then measure who walks in, that becomes really exciting because the e-commerce folks have to figure out how to make social shoppable, right? We don't have to worry about that. All we have to say is, hey, Rob saw this Tommy's Taco ad on TikTok, right? So I think really having those integrations with all the social platforms is key. And then programmatic, I'm looking at this big TV in the background there. CTV is huge. And because we have the email and because the user's plugged in with a Hulu or Roku device or what have you, that becomes really powerful. So we've seen a lot of people really leaning in on CTV, and then we can measure who was exposed to the ad and then who came inside. A funny anecdote. I think Wendy's and DoorDash did this enormous Super Bowl campaign. And all I could think about is, how are they measuring? This is costing, who knows?
Well, actually, that's what's going on in my head right now. Okay. So you put it on the TV and you're connected through Roku or Fire Stick or whatever it is. But how actually would you measure both the, the exposure on it, but also the, that somebody took action?
Yeah, because that email is really the unifier. So because you're plugged in on your phone and on the TV, even if you see that Wendy's ad on the TV, if you took your device and walked inside, we could measure that, and that's what becomes really key. The email's the unifier, and that attribution is really, really exciting. So we are starting to partner more and more with even these connected TV media platforms because they even have a hard time measuring and explaining to their clients the ROI on CTV. At Adentro,
I just like to point out something that probably most food service people would not be thinking about. Okay, and it's sort of important. We don't realize how connected we really are right now. But to your point, if you are going to be on a connected TV, and so many people are doing streaming, you have to have an email address associated with that to log on. And by the way, log on to channels or whatever. So people just may not realize that. So what you are saying is once the email address is out there, okay, assuming that you do your part of connecting to the people who can collect that data because you're not directly connected to the TV, okay, but you can be connected to those data sources, you actually can identify based upon the person's TV being on and what they're watching and what it is that they have, that they had exposure to an ad or something, that an impression of your operation. I think that's what you've just said.
Yep.
So that's a way somebody should be thinking about it, right?
That's exactly right. We can measure. Rob was watching, he was watching Breaking Bad. He saw a commercial for, Bolero Bowling Alley or Pete's Coffee or whatever. He then, in a 30-day look back window, visited that storefront. And that's
because
really
you can tie the two together because you're connected to the email address.
That's right.
And even the email address is connected to the phones and the portable devices. So I just want to make sure that people.
Yeah. And even if you get a new phone, right, we have continuity there with that mobile ID.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So that shows, by the way, the power of data and how we can collect it in ways we don't think of. I suppose that one of the other ways, I've talked to a number of people about is affinity groups. And, I have different credit cards and I will get things from them and say, Red Lobster, you get this offer this month or that one, or come in and use this card on that. And I suppose as soon as you're also connected to those networks, which may exceed your 62 million, which may exceed that, right? You now have an extended reach. So I'm curious about this. If you have okay, let me make sure I got it right. Do you have 62 million within your own network?
Correct.
So then you have the extended reach, right?
Yeah, we have 62 million people that Adentro has the right to track and trace and market.
That you've identified. Correct. Okay. And they have Adentro IDs.
Yep, exactly right.
Okay. So beyond that, though, if somebody invests in you and then they take that second level and they invest in you to sort of help them get their marketing message out, right? Through the means that you're getting out there, I'm curious, does 62 million become, 3 billion, or something like that through the extended reach of where else you'd be connecting? Have you ever measured that?
So the way to think about it, Rob, is we can only, since they've given Adentro with those captive portal opt-ins, there's a double opt-in where they're giving the PII to the restaurant and to
That's
Adentro.
The small print you should read when you check the box.
Yeah. So that dual opt-in, right? And it's GDPR, CCPA, completely compliant. So there's a 62 million seed list that all of our partners can tap into. So in the Red Lobster example, we can work with Red Lobster to say, in any storefront, give me a 10-mile radius of somebody who has an affinity for seafood, right? And that's where that 62 million seed list becomes exciting. Red Lobster can also, we can import their email list and we can say, hey, Rob's already in your email loyalty program. Guess what? Your people that you've already captured, here's their other offline behaviors. They like to go to the Bolero bowling alley. They like to shop at the Simon Mall. Now we tap back into
Do they score strikes?
Exactly. They have exactly. And now we say, hey, let's throw out your current first party data. Let's target lookalikes and now drive all this new customer acquisition in for Red Lobster. That's an exactly use case of Adentro.
And you would be able to give them, through your reporting, their return on investment, the reports that shows, due to working with you, working through the affiliates, whatever programs it is, what the effectiveness or what it did for their operations, which is sometimes the hardest thing to measure, as you said.
Bingo. And not only that ROI, Rob, but ROI by channel. So how is your media performing on Facebook versus Instagram versus TikTok versus programmatic? It's completely transparent in our dashboard.
I want to thank Nathaniel Brogadier, the president of Adentro, formerly ZenReach, and a industry supporter member of the IFBTA, for joining us today. But thank you so much for the support and what you're doing in the industry and bringing a fresh perspective to our members.